Hello and welcome to the Homebrewery. I am Gary and Reaver. In this series I will talk about homebrewed content for Dungeons & Dragons, probably mostly that I've written, evaluating, explaining and demonstrating it. Today I'm looking at my poison overhaul for 5e. I feel that poisons in D&D are a severely underutilized resource, and I understand why they are the way they are. It's a balancing thing to make them not a compulsory part of any competitive build. But in doing so, it's made them virtually worthless. Well, not worthless, but not worth the time and effort by the point most have access to them. So I set out to create a way to make them competitive, to make them viable for a character build. I took the existing official list of poisons, changed some, removed some, added a lot. At time of writing, I have settled for a list of 203 poisons, covering the whole spectrum from about 15 gold up to about 3,000. Massively varied effects, in short, enough to make them viable as a core build or class mechanic. But rather than try to make them their own class and try to balance against all the other classes, I decided instead to write a set of subclasses, one for each official class, that focus on poison damage or physical poisons. In this series, I will be demoing these various poison-based subclasses, but in this video, I will just be talking about my overhaul of physical poisons. Although there isn't a lot mechanically that have changed, I feel I have brought things together. There are various things I borrowed from other creations, various things I've taken from official media, such as the DMG. I think I've created a new system that doesn't necessarily revolutionize poisons in D&D, but it certainly makes them a lot more varied and viable. First of all, poison classifications. There are two ways that poisons are classified in my overhauled poison list, the whole of which can be found on a Google Sheet linked in the description. Feel free to browse the list at your leisure, as there are over 200 poisons. I won't be going through them all in this video. The two ways that I classify poisons are by type and by category, in other words, by use and by source. For the types, they are taken directly from the Dungeon Master's Guide. The four types of poison are contact, ingested, inhaled, and injury. This is the means by which victims are subjected to the poison. The DMG doesn't clearly define the scope of each of these, so it's largely up to the individual DM to decide what is and isn't acceptable use. What I consider to be the intended and generally acceptable uses of these types are as follows. Contact poisons need to make physical contact with the skin, so they could be applied to a surface or a weapon, or perhaps just thrown at someone. Ingested poisons need to be eaten or drunk, so can be hidden in someone's food or drinks. Inhaled poisons need to be breathed in, although it's generally accepted that holding one's breath isn't enough. They get into your nose, your eyes, etc. and have the same effect. These can be powders or gases that are thrown at someone. Injury poisons are a little ill-defined, but I see it as getting into the blood. Logically, eating an injury poison would probably still affect you, but they're generally delivered by being applied to a piercing or slashing weapon and then landing a hit. That's the official stuff, but the other way I classify poisons is by category or source. To be upfront, I did not come up with the idea of categorizing poisons by source. I found this idea on a list of community-made poisons, also linked in the description, but on that it didn't mean anything. I've taken those categories, defined them, and differentiated them. The four categories of poison are split into two subcategories, natural and artificial. Natural poisons are venoms, which come from poisonous creatures, and plants, which come from poisonous plants. They are natural because you can use them raw from the source, as it were. If you milk a python, you will have python venom, and you don't need to do anything more to it to make it usable. Artificial poisons, however, are when you need to do some work before your raw ingredients become something poisonous. Artificial poisons are toxins and mixtures. Toxins I see as requiring alchemical or cooking processes, heating, cooling, etc., whereas mixtures are when you simply combine raw ingredients and that's enough. To be perfectly frank, there isn't a great deal of difference between toxins and mixtures. It's more of a fluff difference, but the artificial-natural barrier plays a much larger role. Now that I've outlined the classifications, let's look at an example of each category. Shalevine extract, an injury toxin. Bale, an inhaled mixture. Truth serum, an ingested toxin. And sap gum, a contact mixture. Almost everything in my list has a resist DC, so when the victim is subjected to the poison, however it's delivered, they must roll equal to or higher than it on a saving throw determined by the particular poison. There are some that don't have a DC, like Ankheg Acid, which we'll come back to. And in most cases, if the victim passes the save, there is no effect. That said, some that do damage instead do half damage on a successful save. If they fail the relatively low DC 10 Constitution save, the victim takes 1d6 poison damage immediately, and then another 1d6 at the start of their next turn. Due to how easy this is to resist and the low damage it deals, this is a low tier poison. I came up with a scoring system to gauge the relative value of poisons and assign them a gold price for campaigns, and Shale Vine Extract only scored 140. This would give it a recommended retail price of 119 gold pieces per dose. I won't go into the scoring system in detail here, it is fully explained on the poison list Google Sheet linked below, but I will say that it takes into account damage, additional effects, duration, resist DC, etc. And that it roughly corresponds to official pricing. 119 gold is still a fair bit for a max of 2d6 damage, but it stops it being a must-buy for all attacks, while also being considerably cheaper than official listed poison prices. But thinking poisons should only deal poison damage against Constitution saves is very closed-minded. So let's take a look at Bale. With a resist DC of 14 on a Wisdom save, because it attacks the mind instead of the body, a failure will render the victim unable to regain hit points by healing magic or items, although resting would still work, until the Bale is magically cured. The idea here is that it infects magical channels, inhibiting healing by unnatural means. You see, along with all the mechanical information, I've written some fluff for each poison. A description of what the dose physically looks like, in Bale's case a pouch of pale green powder that glows very faintly in pitch darkness, and a little snippet of lore that you can ignore or change if it doesn't fit your world, again in Bale's case the inhibiting magical channels. Due to Bale's powerful effect, it scored 1,680, giving it a recommended retail price of 1,428 gold per dose. Considering it can almost completely cut someone off from healing, I think that's fair. As an inhaled poison, you can use it in combat by using an action to throw the contents of the bag in someone's face. Truth Serum, as an ingested toxin, is rather tricky to use in a combat situation, but this one in particular is not really a combat poison. Truth Serum is actually an official poison coming straight from the DMG. Requiring a DC 11 Constitution save to resist, victims are poisoned for 1 hour. While poisoned in this way, they cannot knowingly speak a lie, exactly as if they are under the effect of Zone of Truth. This is particularly interesting in 3 regards. First, the truth-telling part is contingent on the poisoning. Curing the poisoning ends the effect, but anti-magic things do not. Second, it's a way for any party to replicate the effect of a certain spell without needing the classes or even the level that can cast it. I've leaned into this with my own poisons, making them something of an alternative to spellcasting, particularly for my subclasses that use them. Third, Zone of Truth is against a Charisma save, while this is against a Constitution save. That's another thing I've done with some of mine, presenting alternative ways against different saves to get the same effects. This helps make poison a useful tool in your belt. I've done my best to cover the full spectrum of status effects in my poisons: blinding, deafening, silence, different damage types. You can specialize in poisons without ever using poison damage. Due to the dual effect of poisoning and truth, Truth Serum scored 275 in my system, which puts my recommended retail price at 234 GP per dose. This is actually about 80 gold higher than the official listed price in the DMG, one of the few cases of my price being higher, but I trust my system. The last example, Sap Gum, is a contact mixture. Contact poisons are probably the most versatile due to the ease of delivery. You could apply it to a sword like an injury poison, you could apply it to a hammer and hit them in the face, you could apply it to a surface you know the victim will touch like a door handle or even your coat, if you're careful. However you get them to touch it, Sap Gum requires a DC 11 Constitution save to resist, and if they fail, their exhaustion increases by 1. This is to represent the gum sapping their vitality. Interestingly though, if they fail the save by 5 or more, their exhaustion increases by 2 instead. Perhaps unlikely with a DC of 11, but that could be very debilitating. Due to the effects of exhaustion, Sap Gum scored 990 in my system, getting a recommended retail price of 842 gold. With these prices, I did sort of base them on the campaign I'm running, which is a relatively low-paying one. If you're running a high-paying campaign, try doubling the prices I suggest. The important thing is the relative prices affected by how strong the poisons are compared to each other. You'll notice that up to now I've been sticking to artificial poisons, toxins and mixtures. This may seem strange as only about a third of the total number of poisons in my list are artificial. But frankly there wasn't as much creativity in the natural ones, more bookkeeping. You see, I went through every book I could get my hands on and came away with a list of venoms. At the time of writing, that's 122 natural poisons derived from creatures in officially released books. Demons, dragons, undead, trolls, gorgons, and worms. If their attacks or abilities suggest they have something that could be harvested and weaponized, they are represented in my list of poisons. They're included less for the purposes of finding in shops or loot piles, and more so your party can encounter virtually any venomous creature in the multiverse and collect from it for their own use. There are some I've made up, mostly plants, but for the rest their effects are extrapolated, or directly taken, from monster stat blocks. We'll look at two examples of these: green venom and ankheg acid. Green dragons have poison in both their bite and their breath. Their breath poison is listed as green miasma, and their bite as green venom. They both come in 4 strengths, one for each stage of the dragon's growth, but each set are virtually identical except for the damage and the resist DC. For simplicity, let's just look at adult green venom. Green venom is an injury venom with a resist DC 18 on a constitution save. Failing deals 2d6 poison damage or half as much on a success. Using the same scoring system, this nets it 252 points with a recommended value of 214 GP. Where it gets interesting is how you acquire it. Every single venom, and even a couple of plants, are harvested from a creature you can encounter and fight. Each of these poisons states how they must be harvested, with there being 4 possible ways: from a dead, an incapacitated, a captured, or a willing creature. Dead harvesting works if the venom is still potent and accessible after death. This would probably require a medicine check. Incapacitated harvesting works if, for whatever reason, you can't or don't want to kill the creature, and its venom can be forcibly collected. This is vital if the venom is no longer potent or accessible after death, possibly using animal handling. Captured harvesting is very similar to incapacitated, but probably requires more specialist equipment than you would have in the field. The average adventurer couldn't exactly collect dragon breath. The check required for this would be very circumstantial given the preparation. Willing harvesting is the nicest of the lot. This is when the creature allows you to collect its venom through training or some sort of deal. This might not require any check at all. Green venom can be collected through all 4 methods, but that's quite rare among venoms. Usually you need to come a little prepared. The second example, ankheg acid, is a contact venom that deals 3d6 acid damage. It must be harvested from a dead, incapacitated, or captured ankheg. You're not getting that willingly. Notable by its absence is a resist DC. Instead, it's classified as thrown. That's because it's treated like a vial of acid. If it hits you, it's gonna hurt. Taken directly from the player's handbook, as an action you throw the contents up to 20 feet, making an improvised weapon ranged attack. On a hit, it takes the effect, on a miss, it does not. In my scoring, all thrown poisons are treated as DC 15, giving ankheg acid a score of 315 and a value of 268 GP. The last 2 things on the poison list to mention are legality and rarity. Legality is very dependent on the setting of the campaign you're running. The ones I've marked as legal are generally either very common basic things or otherwise aren't considered lethal weapons. Feel free to completely disregard that column, it is pure suggestion. Rarity, however, does play a role. It's important to the poison-based subclasses, but they sort of have their own list of poisons, meaning this rarity is more for loot and availability purposes. Again, feel free to change these rarities as it suits your campaign. I hope you've heard some things you like in all this. I hope you'll agree that this poison overhaul, ironically, breathes new life into what was an underutilized niche of this game. If you try out any or all of this, or if you just have suggestions and feedback, I would absolutely love to hear it. Some of these numbers, such as for scoring, I did sort of pluck out of the air, so let me know what you think of the scoring system. Did I over or undervalue certain effects? If you repost any of this, please make sure you link back here, and if you have any feedback, I'm open to it as long as you're polite. I'm sure that with your help I can further refine and improve this overhaul. Thank you very much for watching the Homebrewery, and subscribe to Gary and Tabletop for more D&D in the near future. I will catch you later.